Culture and nation. These are two words, concepts, that sometimes, both in non academic discourse, but also in part in academic discourse, are used as equivalents. However, nation is a concept mainly of political science and is linked to the idea of a government with legal mechanisms that support and characterize it. The members of a nation have their lives regulated by the decisions that are taken in the various organs of government. Nations have physical boundaries recognized by other nation states that have nothing to do with cultural boundaries. That is, in one nation, you can have many cultures, and some cultures, they don't stop at the boundaries, at the physical boundaries, they go through the physical boundaries, and they can be a culture, a regional culture, for example, can be shared by members of two different nations. But what is important to think here is about the national culture discourse. Culture is one of the most important components of the construction, legitimation, affirmation, guarantee of a group, developing in its members the idea of the collective, of the unity, of the cohesion. Stuart Hall has developed, for example, studies in the area of national culture and the relevance of how narratives of national cultures are told. Considering nation in the modern and political sense, but also in the older concept of nation, of a family, of community, Hall defines national culture as a discourse, and I quote, a way of constructing meanings which influences and organizes both our actions and our conception of ourselves. National cultures create meanings with which individuals can identify. These national cultures contain stories which we are told, memories that are transmitted, symbols and figures that are also transmitted to us and that we can recognize as part of our national culture. This is very important to build a strong, solid idea of us in the present. I mean, a solid past can sustain a solid present, and a national culture can sustain a nation. If the stories and the discourse weakens, it can lead to its extinction. Hall identifies 5 elements in the discourse of national culture. One, the nation's narrative, the nation's story. How our nation is born, how our nation has resisted, how our nation is conquered, etc., etc. Second, the origins, the continuity, the tradition, what is certain, what keeps always the same. And in the third place, the country, the recent practice, the recent rituals, the recent symbolics, because a culture needs new things, needs a dynamic, needs to evolve. Fourth, the foundational myths. And fifth, the people. This is not the people that in the moment hold the power, is the popular, what we talk the nation's heart. That defines the national culture. A national culture, for Stuart Hall, is a discursive instrument, and it represents and perceives the difference, the various cultures within the national cultures, that may even have divisions among them, as a united identity. in reality, no nation is made of a people, a culture, or one ethnic group or one ethnicity, because modern nations are culturally hybrid. We can only find one culture, one people, one ethnicity in, for example, the tribes of the Amazon that don't have contact with other cultures. Today, nowadays, most of the nations have various cultures, and the national cultures are also in contact with other national cultures. But this national culture discourse is very important because it allows to think of us, to think of our community as an imagined community, such as Benedict Anderson defined it, avoiding reducing the nation to an institutional phenomenon and a synonym for state. So we have historians, modern historians, like Ernest Gallner or Anderson, and many people studying this question that stress this important trait in the national culture discourse is the idea of the imagined community, a communion of members of the community that, although do not know each other personally, recognize and share common identity aspects. The question of race and ethnicity is also very important because there is also confusion in the definition of the terms. First of all, we have to think that both are linked to cultural constructions and interpretations. If we think about ethnicity, we use ethnicity to refer to a group that shares the same language, historical origins, religion, and identification with a nation or with a cultural system. And this gives rise to a ethnic group, and these ethnic groups can even live in spaces that are different from their place of origin. So we have ethnic groups living in countries where these members of this ethnic group have migrated. So sometimes we have ethnic groups that share their culture and that share their ethnicity, and sometimes we have tensions with the host culture. Different ethnic groups can maintain the same traditions in the place where they migrated to. And they can transport their behaviors, their attitudes, their past. Sometimes, for example, groups that have been in their origin places that have had problems with other ethnic groups. Imagine Somalia, Nigeria, but also Pakistan and India. When they migrate to host countries, they keep their ethnic groups, but they keep their ethnic memory. And sometimes the tensions that they had in their origin countries or areas are transported to the new area. Sometimes ethnic groups, they maintain their identity, but they share their identity with the other groups. Think about the Italian community, the Greek community in the United States, which they maintain, they have their areas, they have their restaurants, they maintain their food, but still they have this possibility of sharing and of contacting between ethnicities and cultures. The question of identity is closely linked to that of otherness and diversity. So we usually make the image or build the image of ourselves or judge oneself by judging the others and their acts and representations. So our collective imagery is built in opposition in the sense of tension with the other. Juan Goytisolo, for example, has said that the peoples of inhabiting the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, only discover themselves Western and Christians when the Arabs invaded the territory and they saw someone different, the other, that was non-Western, a non-Christian. Juan Solo wanted to say that sometimes we only perceive ourselves when we look ourselves in the mirror, and when we look, the mirror is the face of the other, is the other people. Identity is a discourse of time and space, a three-time discourse: past, present, and future, and the space, the one occupied by the group. And of course, is closely linked to the national culture discourse. I hope you have found these concepts interesting and that you will read about them using the handbook, but also using the references.